Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Klazar podcast, where we have some amazing conversations with partnerships and cloud alliance leaders navigating the changing demands of tech procurement. Today, we are talking to Sarah Jackson. Sarah is Cloud and Partner Alliance Director at UserTesting, which is a super exciting study in the Cloud GTM growth, and I'm really excited to go deep in the conversation with her. She has both an entrepreneurial background as well as sales experience with stints at Content Square and Full Story. She generously lends her time and expertise in partnerships to network like partnership leaders. Sarah is also very admirably a vocal and passionate disability advocate who works in multiple ways to increase employment and education opportunities and access to care for those that are impacted by disability. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hey, super happy to be here, Tanel. Thanks for having me. Really excited to have the opportunity to have the conversation today.
All right, Sarah. So let's jump straight into the meat of the question and meat of this podcast. I've been in the space for a while now, and I've seen lots of varied companies really successfully using this channel for their GTM motion. But traditionally it has always relied heavily on the data infrastructure, AI, ML kind of players. But user testing is one such very interesting and fascinating example. It's not the traditional infrastructure company as such, but at user testing, how did you first discover that cloud partnerships had relevance beyond the typical AI data and infra cohort of businesses? And what was the trigger that led you to explore this further?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's a kind of a misunderstanding a lot of companies have that you have to directly align with infrastructure or cloud or specific technical support or solutions around that end of AWS. But the truth is, especially thinking about the acceleration of customer experience, digital experience, really that's happened post COVID, everyone's in that race, right? To drive better experiences in their products, in their mobile apps, on their websites, whatever that might be. So while AWS or Google or Microsoft per se might not have a specific stake or focus in that end of maybe UI UX or providing tools within that space, it does matter to them as a business. It's one of their principal things I know, customer obsession at Amazon and AWS, but they want to be able to provide the value and to close that loop for their customers. And the best way they can do that, they're not going to be able to create everything and build a platform or solution for everything, is through the marketplace, through partners like UserTesting that can help their customers drive those experiences, which ultimately drives them into more success, more stickiness with their customers, more adoption of their platforms and growth, which ultimately for AWS or any of the hyperscalers leads to a lot of value and growth, and obviously their cloud consumption being very well aligned with that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for that context, Sarah. And when you talk about a better together story, right? Like what we work with our customers on is forming a better together story.
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw is and you also pointed out, is sometimes that better together story need to be found.
Mm-hmm.
For some businesses it's like very easy, it's like a hand in glove type of a situation, but in other situations you really have to go deep and really understand what the value prop on both the sides is, and then really drive that to conclusion. So as a business that might not have the technical or engineering better together value proposition,
Mm-hmm.
how did you determine and communicate the value that you brought to the table?
Yes, it's a really good question. So with AWS, it does look a little bit different. So AWS, to clarify, is kind of our initial focus within the cloud marketplaces. It was a little out of the box, but again, aligned back to the digital transformation, acceleration, growth, and scale that matters so much about businesses. Being an AWS architected organization, we do have the leadership, our CTO, and individuals across user testing as an organization that very much understand the importance of these key components of an AWS architecture. So it is a good reference point we have to drive some of those technical conversations. But more or less, that better together story is user testing primarily through our global platform, enabling customers to drive research and understanding, better experience, mitigate risk, especially in their design process across the PLDC. Driving those better experiences, again, drives more consumption, but also drives more adoption of AWS and some of the other services, and offerings that they have for their customers as well. Another important factor is too that a lot of people might not think about is AWS or Google or Microsoft, they want to get into different personas and understand these different use cases as well. So being able to understand maybe what's going on with a UI UX team or a product team that might be out of their purview is extremely valuable. So the better together story, coming back to the question, really is the fact that we're driving better experiences, better adoption, better success within the customers, lowering their costs ultimately as they build, develop, and launch product. But ultimately, again, driving back to that bottom line of success. If they're successful, AWS is successful. And that's been a message that's really resonated across AWS teams and something they've been very interested to learn more about.
Got it. And so just to pull on that thread, Sarah, so you talked about having a better together story, really driven by the goals and outcomes that drive the two organizations together. Two organizations being user testing on one side and AWS or Azure or GCP on the other side. What was the process behind you coming to the conclusion of, okay, here's how we are going to position ourselves, here's going to be our messaging. Many times we talk to our friends in the community, and everyone understand that there has to be a better together story, and there's different paths to it. But what they struggle with is what's the exact playbook. So could you add a little bit more around what were some of the tactical pieces that we can give to the audience so they understand what to implement when they go back to their desks?
Yeah, great question. And really, I mean, the basis is leveraging the power of AWS or GCP or Microsoft's cloud infrastructure globally, how our partnership can drive the co-innovation, the culture of continuous improvement, really ultimately driving companies to build better products, deliver better experiences, which ends up being a win for those end customers, a win for AWS and the expansion of their services and stickiness of what they offer, as well as a new platform and offering that's really meeting a gap within AWS, specifically their portfolio within the marketplace of a testing tool that has the confidence of customers that's already running on their platform, their infrastructure, that's easier for them to adopt, to leverage. And again, from an infosec standpoint, that's vetted by AWS and that they can easily deploy and use within their organization, obviously with a lot of benefits from the marketplace and the back end of cloud commitment, ease of transaction, invoicing, and all those other pieces. It ended up being a real true story that resonated with AWS and, really resonated with the leadership at UserTesting.
Got it. So on the leadership with you at user testing, right? Like, did you have like a program of sorts where, when you came in, you said, all right, we are going to strike a deeper partnership with AWS or Azure or GCP or all three. And here's the playbook that we're going to use. And, hey, XYZ leader, I would love your help on like, was there a kind of a mechanism behind it, or did it grow organically?
Yeah, I think it's a unique position I came in. So I joined UserTesting the end of April of this year. So very, very recent in that sense. They had been thinking about this marketplace play for several years, thinking about how to operationalize it. So there've been conversations organizationally. I mean, UserTesting's been through quite a bit of change through acquiring our largest competitor and several other factors. So it's always been kind of top of mind, but the actual kind of taking the ball and running with it, what does that look like? How does that operationally impact the business? And the value statement and benefit to the company was something really on day one, aligning with those internal stakeholders and having that conversation about why marketplace, kind of why now, what are the advantages when we look at our overall cost of deal acquisition, our legal resources, per deal, redlining deals for a legal team is very expensive and very difficult to do at scale. Also, ultimately, as a kind of customer obsessed company and a very customer focused company, internally here at UserTesting, it was how do we meet our customers where they are? And that's really the conversation that's resonated across our leadership is when we think about that, it's not only our products and making them easy to adopt and implement, but it's also meeting ultimately our customers where they buy and how they want to buy. And again, since we do support cross vertical, everything from e-commerce, retail, financial services, healthcare, having the marketplace and set up and having that as a transaction vehicle for our customers was ultimately the biggest driver and really organizationally made the most sense as a good fit for UserTesting and a great fit for us now as we're rapidly growing.
Got it. And then was there a point where, so like as you mentioned, you just joined
Mhm.
recently and there was some, building blocks maybe in place, maybe not. And what was the most, like, say, most difficult piece to get over for the organization to get over this hump?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, and I think a lot of people relate to this, I came in thinking legal, right? Legal's always kind of that, how are we going to get an agreement on, the DPA, the MSA, all of the stuff, the EULAs that go around, especially selling SaaS globally. That was actually one of my easier hurdles to get through. Shout out to Roy
Hmm.
Fox for being amazing with that. I think it was really having to dig in, especially as being someone new to the organization, and understand how do we sell, but not only how do we sell, but how do we operationally manage a deal desk, how deals are approved, and
Mm.
the back end operational piece of have all of those internal stakeholders from finance, from our tax team, from our back end integrations with Avalara, with NetSuite, how we're actually recognizing it, revenue and taxes and all of that fun stuff. I'm sure people are cringing on the sales side now, but that's really a big operational piece I had to dive into, try to gain as much quick understanding as I could. Also, I think to be a really open and listen and understand what mattered and how I could drive value to those teams, but also how I could respect how they do things today and try to implement this cloud marketplace transaction process in an easy way that is not going to disrupt what they're currently doing, and with the goal ultimately to hopefully make their lives easier.
Got it. So I think what I'm hearing is like really understanding their workflows
Mhm.
and helping them understand that this new thing that you're trying to, the change that you're trying to affect is not going to disrupt their existing workflows, but going to add more on top of it. And that kind of help you get aligned. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely fair to say. And it was also being respectful of understanding how they approve things today and how those workflows went through. And,
Mm.
specifically, I had the advantage of we'd started the implementation with Klazar on, automating the aspects between Salesforce, between AWS, and a lot of those processes. So the conversations had been started, but this multidisciplinary group that we were able to get together, everyone from RevOps, finance, legal, across the organization in one room in a standing meeting every Monday to dig in with a project manager who's been a dream for me to help kind of wrangle and keep all of these things moving forward. That's really, really been key because you want everyone might not be enthusiastic because change sometimes is hard, especially for operation folks that have a certain way of doing things. But I think giving everyone a seat at the table, having them feel heard, and part of that process was really, really an important part for us to be able to fully roll this out and for everyone to do it with confidence that not only can we make this happen from a revenue perspective, but importantly in the back end that we were checking all the boxes legally,
Mm.
financially, taxes, all of those things across the board so we could have buy-in from our operational folks too, which again have to be part of that conversation.
Got it. In terms of like actually operationalizing this, I heard that you had help from perhaps like a project manager.
Mhm.
So like let's say if someone is in your shoes right now at a similar sized company and they want to affect a similar kind of change, what kind of support system would you recommend that they have on day one to increase their or maximize their chances of success?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. I think a lot of us kind of learn as we go. And I think there are probably different players and different people you might bring in at different points. But especially if I would have been here kind of the day one, right, of starting the marketplace listing and the
Mm.
conversations internally, I think you've got to start initially making sure your CRO, your sales organization, your leadership's on board. They see the value, they support this motion. And part of that too is that are they going to give you visibility and access to the sales team because you have to train them, you have to enable them, you have to kind of walk them through. And a lot of times there's some hand holding there to make sure they're comfortable on those calls with AWS or with the cloud partner. So making sure that piece is in place. The other piece of that, I think a lot of people don't talk about is, so you get through those hoops of co-selling, really co-innovation. And that's something that wasn't initially put in place. I had the ops team, the RevOps, finance, legal, sales buy-in, but now it's, how do we co-innovate? How do we think about our product roadmap? Where do we see those opportunities where we can lean into solution development or competencies? So that's where actually within the last few weeks, I've started to gather a multidisciplinary technical team, engineering,
Mm.
product marketing, to have us start holistically thinking about, okay, now we've kind of gotten through some of these hoops on the partnership, moving quickly here to ISV Accelerate. Now, how do we co-innovate, think about our verticals, use cases, and how, again, we enhance that better together story with AWS through co-innovation.
That's fantastic. I'm going to pull on that thread a little bit, Sarah, the co-innovation piece, because as we think about the partnership with the hyperscalers, is like, co-sell, co-build, co-market, and the entire gamut of it, right? In the co-build ecosystem, how would you say specifically at user testing, what are some of the concrete examples that might be useful for someone in a similar space that you're able to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been fortunate. So our CTO has moved to a CIO role, so a chief innovation officer, really, really
Mm.
timely, actually within the last week. So he's going to be really solely focused with a lot of cloud engineering and architecture knowledge to work with me and is on board with doing that. But I'd say overall, again, going back to this kind of internal buy-in, for me, the first things that we've looked at is kind of where are the gaps? Where our customers, or even for our sales organization, where are the toughest kind of buying cycles? Where could this partnership and co-innovation with AWS create maybe support around a vertical that'll help us kind of deepen those relationships and give us some credibility as we grow into that space? I mean, a great example for us would be healthcare, which is one of our first to find, verticals we're targeting, knowing that BAAs and HIPAA compliance and all of that's very important to them. Top of mind for us is how can we think about then meeting the needs of healthcare companies, insurance companies, with AWS to bring them a co-solution that helps them, again, innovate, drive great experiences, and, do that all on leveraging the cloud platform that they already trust with all of their data.
Got it. And then the motivation on, let's say, AWS side is if they bring in a partner like a user testing who's like, let's say, HIPAA compliant and all of these other compliances in the mix, then their end customer, which is, let's say, a healthcare company, they're much more inclined to be A, staying or using more of AWS, and B, staying more on AWS. Is that a fair way to think about the co-build partnership?
Yeah, it's a fair way, but even better from the AWS
Mm,
or from the marketplace or the cloud provider side, because healthcare is always a late adopter, right?
mm.
So a late adopter to the game that, especially because of the sensitivity of their data, their PII, HIPAA compliant data, they still have a lot of on-prem. So a lot of on-prem, maybe moving to cloud, partially have moved to cloud. So that's a high growth opportunity also for AWS, for Azure, for GCP to lean in with partners, create these type of innovative solutions that lead companies, again, like healthcare as a vertical, to drive more adoption of just overall, moving things to the cloud on a more rapid pace, because we can drive a lot of value for them and making those further commitments towards the cloud.
Okay, so that's actually a great segue into my next question, and I'm going to share a little bit of a story around it. I was chatting with Mike Marzano, who works at Content Square and is a great friend of yours as well, fantastic person. And I was talking to him, and he was mentioning that he had a similar challenge where they are in a space where it's not like a deep consumption driver directly attributable to Content Square in many ways, but what he found is because during the co-sell motion, the hyperscalers were extremely interested in going in other parts of the enterprises and organizations. And Content Square was kind of a way for them to get into that. Right now, taking that your example of healthcare, is that a similar
Mhm.
kind of motion you're seeing and trying to affect?
Absolutely. And I think that the thing a lot of people don't realize is our projects, whether that be in UX research or in product. I know from the Content Square use case, a lot of times might be in marketing. Those are conversations AWS isn't always privy to, or projects that they don't know
Mm.
about. So it's extremely valuable for them, as they're typically, in lockstep, maybe with the CIO, the CTO, to understand how some of these other projects that might be going on align to really the overall initiatives that they're trying to drive and the conversations and value they're trying to drive to this AWS customer. I think a great example was recently, not healthcare specific, but hospitality specific. We were, coincidentally, it doesn't usually happen, the AWS account team and we were working with the same people here at UserTesting, but our projects look totally different. So they were trying to basically rectify a very, very large database of duplicate information. So maybe they might have one persona for Trinal with 50 different profiles. So that was kind of more on the AWS side of what they're trying to rectify and clean up that data and provide that value. We on our side, we're working much more on the customer facing side of how do we suss out that data, take these now personas and profiles that have been cleaned up and understand what matters most to them, get their direct feedback of what would make them a loyalty customer or card holder versus potentially, just a one-time buyer. So our projects were very much aligned with the same people, coincidentally, which again doesn't always happen, but it created great synergy within the conversations and value we could drive together, because our driving usage and our driving better data was really just supporting the project that AWS from a technical perspective was already supporting with the account.
Interesting. So like you've seen this motion from the other side pretty much, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, 100%. And ultimately too, I mean, AWS or Google or Microsoft, like they're vetted and invested in seeing these companies succeed. So seeing them grow, see them more, proactively and effectively deploy product and grow as a business is completely in line with what they're looking to accomplish. It might look a little bit different, as we touched on in the beginning, than network infrastructure or hardware or some of the other solutions. But again, especially with the world being a digital world now, helping their customers understand how to innovate and drive better experience is completely aligned with cloud consumption and driving more usage of AWS or whichever cloud provider it might be.
So, Sarah, on the same lines, right? Like the healthcare example that you gave, like I'm really intrigued by this specific example that you gave. And so maybe like without taking any specific customer names or revealing anything confidential to user testing, could you help us understand how that entire motion actually worked, where, you were in maybe talking with big customers, you brought AWS in, and then that kind of like helped both you and AWS, not from like maybe the project didn't start from a pure infrastructure standpoint, but then eventually ended up helping you both.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. It was a very kind of eye-opening call, to say the least. So we have a large airline that's been an established customer for user testing that was also running on AWS. So important thing to look and understand, who your customers are running on before you start these conversations or register those opportunities. But we had an upcoming renewal, potential expansion with the account. I registered the deal. We got on the phone with the account manager for the airline. And coincidentally, in that specific case, we were talking to the similar people, kind of similar departments, and came to realize that AWS on the IT and the infrastructure side was supporting a large project to help them clean up and kind of deduplicate their data in regards to their customers, their targets, their kind of marketing list, their overall database that had, as we all know, I'm sure most of us might have more than one email address, or maybe somebody gets married, names change. There were a lot of duplications there. So that was kind of the AWS side of the project, where we were working specifically with the airline on understanding, once this data is cleaned out, how to drive those better experiences. So once they started to understand who's a loyalty customer, or who's our repeat buyer, or who maybe only, flew with us once, how do we better understand now how to serve them, now that we're getting this cleaned up, really more actionable data that we can leverage from a marketing perspective, product development across the organization. So it's a really, really neat moment to think that we were kind of supporting the initiative that AWS was driving, just in a different capacity, that as the data was being cleaned up, we were working with the airline to ensure they really maximize the investments that they'd made to drive better experiences and really drive growth overall, whether it be a net new customer or with customers that were within their loyalty program.
Okay, Sarah, on a slightly different topic, like when we were talking earlier, you quipped about how you need a bachelor in hyperscaler. By the way, I love that love that term. Need a bachelor's in hyperscaler to figure out the whole motion, right? And I 100% agree. I see that day in, day out in the community. There's so much more to listing than meets the eye, right? And this reminded me of a conversation that I just had on our podcast just recently with Laura from Datadog. And she shared that when she was communicating her vision to the cloud partnerships, of cloud partnerships, to her like sales team, right after she joined Datadog, the sales leader stopped her with in the middle of the conversation and said, we have no idea what, what you're talking about, right? Which is to say that Cloud GTM is a relatively new and very evolutionary and highly technical space, right? So I have a couple of questions to pick your brain on. One is, what was the starting point for you in terms of actual execution? That's one. And second is the people side, like who, what were your resources? How did you help navigate the entire situation, and what was the sustenance phase after this motion? So tell us all about how you got your bachelor's.
Yeah, my bachelor's. I think that the main thing I'd say overall is it is unique, right? So I've been in sales, I would say selling SaaS before it was SaaS, like back in 2000, right? So technical things from network security, voice over IP, I'm dating myself, but all across the gamut. I mean, it's technical hard things, right? Partnerships, ISVs, GSIs, agencies, all of the above, right? It is different. It's like you really have to start, especially when you're going to your sales organization or different organizations in the company, that you can't go in with any assumptions that they know about partnerships or support partnerships, and they're going to instantly, to your point and Laura's point from Datadog, understand what this actually means. So I think the most important thing and what I leaned into was UserTesting does a lot of what they call sales plays. That's a very, very structured way and format, from battle cards, from resources, supports, and tools that they develop, whether it's going after a new vertical, whether it might be a new product release. So that I kind of took into that framework, understanding, okay, if this is how we're already teaching cross functionally and teaching our sales team and our go to market teams about new concepts, how can I kind of latch onto that and then structure AWS specifically around something that's already familiar to them?
Mm,
But the important piece of that is making it as simple as possible. And I think simple as possible, not in a demeaning way, but salespeople today and go to market teams have so much thrown at them, really just telling them very specifically what it is, how it's going to impact them, what's the value to them, what's the value to the partner, like why would an AWS or a cloud partner want to work with us? And then what is that actual process? What could they do today? So
mm,
in this specific case, it was I had uploaded through our partner widget in Salesforce a very large list of all of our AWS customers, all the AWS customers, so they could go in right with where they are working on a daily basis and see within Salesforce at the account or opportunity, it's an AWS customer. So that to kind of get them thinking about or to look at across my established customer base or prospect list, which of these accounts might run on AWS. Then from there, having them understand the next process would be to register the opportunity, understanding the data that I needed to make sure was in Salesforce. And it's going to be much easier as we're going live now with the Klazar integration to just push that data to AWS, but with the caveat the data's got to be good data. So I've had to ride alongside a lot of that. But I think ultimately it's being prescriptive,
mm,
but it's also, I think, and I always quote this, I think I've been through every sales methodology, but always go back in my 20s. I didn't realize it at the time, but Miller Hyman strategic selling is understanding everyone's personal win. So
mm,
for me, especially with sales, I'm thinking about what's going to matter to sales. What are they going to want to know about? What do they need to know? And what are the benefits for them? I have multiple decks. It looks different for what I tell the ops team. It looks different for what I might tell our SE
mm.
team or our CSMs, because I think aligning to and bringing that message, since it is so complicated, to the most simple possible steps of what can they do today, what's the long-term opportunity, and kind of what's in it for them and how it can help them be and their customers be more successful is an important aspect. It's not a one size fits all. You build the deck, you pat yourself on the back. It's going to constantly be a new iteration, and especially if you're doing the partnership right, new competencies, solutions, and products that you roll out as well. So I think it's just being an active listener, getting to know kind of what the pain points are too for your sales organization or CSMs, or what their KPIs and what they're being tasked with, and then really trying to align that message to what they can do, but also like how it's going to positively impact them.
And Sarah, as you're speaking, right? Like I've heard this from many partnership leaders, which is is resonating with what you're saying. Is it's almost like being a partnership leader within an organization is almost like a sales job, except your customers are your peers and other. So it's like you really have to understand their pain points, why they're saying what they're saying and bringing that value, which is kind of like with your different decks that are tailored to different organizations,
Mhm.
having those conversations. So it like falls in line with that for sure.
I 100% agree. And I mean, I've said over and over, it's the internal partnerships that are oftentimes so much more difficult and so much more,
Mm,
challenging to navigate than the external partnerships, right? I mean, just
mm,
getting a partnership in place, I think we've historically seen it done so many times of, hey, this company's partnered with this company, big press release, woohoo, what does it mean, right? Like, what is that actually going to bring back to the organization? How does it impact the way we sell or the way we support our customers overall? So I think it's really, really important that, yeah, you've got to keep your eyes inside, which I know a lot of us, especially if you're on the revenue side or, in a partnership leader that's been very equipped in, developing a lot of pipeline and closing a lot of business, you do have to kind of take a little pause there to think about how am I going to internally build the relationship as successfully as I'm focusing externally on that specific partner.
I see. And then in on a tactical basis, Sarah, did you like when you went to your sales leadership, like did you go to all of them? Did you go to the leader, or did you get like your own like secret little champion within the sales team and got him or her really bought into the motion? Like what was your specific route?
Yeah, it's a great question. A combination of both, right? So, one of the first things I ask coming in, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have done as well. You want to understand which kind of RVPs or sales leaders have leaned in most to
Mm,
partnerships that might be the best
mm,
kind of warm conversation to kind of test it out. Also, for me, it was understanding the context of as I got further in these conversations and one on ones with the RVPs and sales leaders, if they weren't bought into partnerships, why? Like, what had their experience been? Like, how could that be improved?
mm,
What was this kind of blueprint look like in an ideal world, that kind of North Star metric of how this AWS or cloud marketplace motion could maybe be different or better than what they've had in the past? So it was direct alignment. Also, for me, very proactive in the sense of finding AEs that leaned in as well. Finding AEs because having them tell the story or these sales leaders tell the story internally is always so much more valuable. If you can get somebody to stand up, recent win for us that had a renewal, had an expansion on the renewal 2 weeks later because it went through the marketplace. They've already expanded that again. Like having them tell that story internally, that's where the real value comes from in building that alignment. But also, it takes some scrappiness and it takes the work, right? Especially being earlier on in the partnership, I know that building our pipeline and ACE, putting our best opportunities and that foot forward is super, super important. So I do spend time understanding and asking our sales leadership, what are your key deals for the rest of the year? What are your key deals for in quarter? And I have a list of those. So I'm proactively registering deals that I know are important to the business and then making those
mm.
introductions and closing those loops and educating one by one as we get on the calls with AWS, making our sales team comfortable, understanding the value proposition, how to start to build that bachelor's degree and talking to a cloud as we go. But I mean, it takes some scrappiness. And regardless of how big your business are, if you're a small startup or an established company like a UserTesting, we've all got to put in the work. You got to roll up your sleeves. You've got to dive in and, register the ops and try to create the best partner experience you can, whether it be AWS, GCP, Azure, or any of the partners that you work with within your portfolio.
Absolutely. And Sarah, so much of it is also boils down to the quality of training that an organization is providing to the sales reps, right?
Mhm.
Is there anything specific that you've done that might be useful for the audience in terms of helping the A's understand the value prop? That's step one.
Yep.
But once they've understood it, like of course, like you need to have the integrations in Salesforce and stuff, but like the reinforcement and constant communication from a partnership leader and your team to them, like what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's interesting and very kind of small shop too. I'm running a lot of this, on my own. And I did learn this from my experience at Content Square and just fundamentally my message to them back to the point that it is a lot to learn is you're not in it
Mm,
on your own. And so
mm,
I've given them a lot of structure and kind of guardrails and hand holding
mm,
in the sense of here's what's going to happen. Once the ACE opportunity is approved, here's the exact format of the email that you're going to send. It's going to have the context that's going to be consistent. And it's going to give the AWS teams that receive, thousands of partner requests, the information they need to help us set up the call and to get the support that we're looking for in those opportunities. Another thing that I was kind of adamant about, and it is a lot of work, but worthwhile, is being on the calls with the AEs on their first call with AWS, with that
Mm.
partner. So I'm always on as a buffer to make the introduction, to set up the call, to give a context on where we're at with AWS, that we run on AWS, that we are ACE eligible, to use all the terminology that I'm not going to put on them to know yet, then set them up and tee them up in the best possible way for them to talk about what we do as a company, and then jump into the details of the opportunity and what our specific ask is so we can move forward. And it really does set the tone, especially since PDMs and a lot of people on those initial AWS calls might support, a whole vertical or a whole, handful of other accounts. Doing it the right way, setting that bar high and being consistent with that opens you up to getting lists from them of different accounts, walking away from a call that you talked about, maybe let's say one airline, back to the example, and you have a list of 15 other accounts that you can go potentially think about working on with them. So I think it's just setting the bar high, not putting too much and making, your sales team feel like they have to figure it out on their own, but helping and putting the resources and the support in place that they are comfortable, they learn the muscle, and learning it hands-on, oftentimes, especially for go-to-market teams, is the best way, where you can set a high quality standard, but they feel like they're getting the support they need as well.
Got it. And there's a follow-up question for you, Sarah. Like, there's two schools of thoughts here, and I could be, swinging either ways. Like, one school of thought is, hey, the sales team should completely own it. They should create their own private offers. They should do the co-sell, uploading opportunities, and the partnership team acts like a platform and almost like a support function,
Yep.
where if they have issues, they come to the partnership. So that's one school of thought.
Yep.
What you just mentioned is you are actually on the call with the AE and the AWS account manager. So that's the other end of the spectrum. Now, in a company's journey on the entire cloud sales motion, right? Where do we like? Do you see this as a temporary motion where you are hand-holding each A, and eventually you would love to be in that utopia land of A's doing all the work
That's where
themselves?
we're headed. Yeah,
Okay, got it.
absolutely. No, and it's a great question. I'm sure some people are like, that's crazy. But it's also for me to see what's resonating. It's seeing how we talk about, let's say, even what UserTesting does. Is that message resonating with the teams at AWS, so I can further refine the message so we can be automated, and so I can pass off a lot more of that responsibility to them. But this is kind of the temporary initial state where I can understand what we do well and where I need to build more resources, more training and enablement, where I need to put in more kind of work. Maybe it's a PDF that's customer facing that helps, our AEs send out more information for people to understand why UserTesting is in the marketplace. So it's kind of that temporary initial state where, yes, it's very controlled, but it also gives me a lot of data to make sure we're doing it right. We're setting ourselves up right, and we're building the best possible kind of brand and internal branding with AWS or any future cloud partner of, we're there, we're not sloppy, and we're certainly going to, come buttoned up to every call, respectful of their time and appreciative of their help.
So no, thanks a lot, Sarah. That's a fantastic playbook, right? Like with everything else in life, initially you have to have this motion of almost brute forcing your way into a change, and then once that becomes a habit, then you can sort of move to the scale motion. Love it, love it.
100%. I think a lot of it is those internal wins and getting those wins and having an AE or a sales leader go out and say, hey, we closed this deal into the quarter. We're able to get it through because of this help from this partner, and sharing those partner stories. That's why it's worth it to me. Again, not being like overly controlling, that's not the goal, but to help us get the wins, to get the velocity and to get the quality and understand what's working, what's not, to help us really drive at scale, where I can say with confidence that I could sit back a little bit more, focus more on the more tactical parts of the relationship and partnership. And then I also just done the legwork and put in the work to help my sales teams be successful.
Got it. Makes total sense. Okay, Sarah, another podcast guest, our favorite Alex Balkankwal from the Cloud Software Group, spoke about many of the overlooked operational aspects of marketplace in motion. These behind the scenes building blocks are so important, but hard to find resources for. How did you figure these aspects out? And specifically, what I'm talking about is audit, taxation, revenue reconciliation, private offer automation, all these type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important question. And I'm sure there's so many people listening that have gone down the road of reading a document, being referred to another document, that document's not there. I mean, it's really overwhelming. And especially, I think a lot of us on the partnership leader side of things, you probably haven't been in the depths of taxes and finance and all of these other aspects that come into play. Great opportunity to learn, not necessarily my favorite part of the job. So I think a lot of it is don't go at it alone. I think, start to understand who's leading in the space. There's great newsletters out there. There's companies like Czar that can help you, that have already done this motion, that understand what the incremental steps are to make sure you're successful and you're not making critical mistakes on your marketplace setup or on how you're going to plan to co-sell. In addition to that, I huge plug on partnership leaders that has a whole group within their organization. If people aren't familiar with that, it's just global SaaS partner leaders, exactly that, from everything from smaller ISVs up to an Adobe, being able to have a Slack group that you can just send a question to and say, has anyone else ever run into this? I mean, it's really been helpful in preventing me from going down holes or investing a lot of time potentially in something where I could get a quick answer from somebody that's either in the throes of the same place I am in the process, or a lot of companies out there that are much more mature in their cloud journey that can lean in and provide some guidance. So it's tough on the cloud side because a lot of times you feel like you're in an island. I know internally, so many people I talk to, everyone will say, well, just call somebody at AWS or call somebody at Google. Like, it doesn't always work that way. It's got a structure specifically put in place and hoops you have to jump through before you get to that point. So I just encourage, follow the Jay McBains of the world, follow these, people who have got that proven success, and don't hesitate to reach out. I think anyone that's been through it is going to really, really be open to helping, supporting, and helping to educate someone for having a better experience perhaps than they did trying to set up this complex of a program.
Absolutely. And you took some names here like partnership leaders, fantastic community. Jay McBain, amazing leader to follow. Vince Menzione is another one that I have a lot of respect for
Roman
as well.
is like,
Roman is
his
the
stuff
other
is
one. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. So really good. So it's really fascinating to see like all this help being available in this day and age that wasn't
Yeah,
there, maybe literally like 8 months ago, it wasn't there. Like, so the community is growing, which is fantastic to see. Awesome.
definitely.
So, Sarah, as we come to the conclusion of this podcast, a few thoughts from your side. One is from a tactical perspective on how and where your marketplace motion fits in between, other channels and direct sales. Could you add a little bit color on how it fits in, like partnerships, direct sales, and channel sales, and how they all interact with each other in specifically your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think specific to user testing, a lot of what we do is direct. The other main secondary channel has been through value-added resellers, a lot of times really more in a one-off capacity, trying to meet the customer's need of, especially globally, by country or by complexity of getting that sale done, that maybe had a preferred software, company provider or reseller that they wanted to go with. So there's been a lot of openness from an organizational standpoint to the marketplace play because it is a standardized process, right? We know the expectations of fees and how it works, and that there's advantages not only for user testing, but specifically for the customer. So really, as we look moving forward, I mean, our play, there's going to be always the direct component, especially till we get multi-cloud. There's not going to be everyone running on AWS, specifically as well. But as much business as we can potentially drive is the goal through the marketplace is, our number one, and that kind of North Star guide that we're headed towards, to make it easier for our customers, to make it easier from a vendor onboarding and some of the challenges in InfoSec that we run into, in trying to close our initial contracts. So my goal, obviously, in my side of the fence, I'd love us to be marketplace first on everything. But at this point, that's the velocity that we look to drive. The direct play with marketplace being our primary, and really kind of moving away from some of those more traditional reseller or channel models that have been leveraged in the past.
Got it. And this is actually a great segue into my last question, which is when you started, let's say you had envisioned that you would be in milestone X by the time this quarter ends, or the next quarter ends. I do you think where you are, where you envisioned you would be when you started the effort, and then where does user testing go from now in terms of their partnerships?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So again, I'm like about 3 months in, right? So I have to think objectively, not with my perfectionist hat on. I'd say yes and no. I mean, so we're in a good spot of, over 100 opportunities currently registered. We've had 6 different marketplace, private offers that have already been accepted and wins. So we've got wins, we've got pipeline. I'd say I didn't ever anticipate some of the operational, again, back to that importance of those internal conversations. That's definitely lagged things from a velocity standpoint and caused some pause here and there that has kind of prevented. I would have loved to have been ISV Accelerate today, but we're very,
Mm.
very close now to getting there and getting that alignment to move forward quickly. So I think ultimately, in the short amount of time, to be able to get buy-in from sales leadership, operations, legal, have the motion that we're actively, registering opportunities, having great conversations with Amazon, learning how to work with them. I think that's a win. And to have 5, launched private offers under our belt, or 6, I think at this point, is a great place to be. But there's always a lot of growth and room to go from here. So as of what's next, it's going to be, again, for us, it's prioritizing ISV Accelerate competencies and solutions that we really are leaning into with that co-innovation piece. And very, very quickly, I'm looking to move to a multi-cloud strategy for user testing. So
Mm.
a lot on my plate. There's a whole other bachelor's degree potentially I consider. It's not marketplace bachelor's, it's, per Pacific cloud provider. So I've got another at least master's or PhD coming soon. But I think hopefully I'll be able to take some of the great structure and operational excellence we've been able to build that'll make it easier as I navigate the next path of what's ahead for the next cloud provider.
That's such a good point, Sarah. And Sarah, I feel so confident that user testing will do so well just because you are at the helm of the
I
leadership. So
appreciate
thank you
it.
so much. No, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful catching up, and good luck. And I'll see you
All
around.
right. Sounds good. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.